Judaism and Jewish mysticism. That's where we're headed. I've relied on these books. David Noss, A History of the World's Religions, and Houston Smith, The World's Religions. And also, I want to address some things out of this book. Yes. The Tree of Life. If you haven't seen this is a very interesting book. The Tree of Life by Roger Cook, Image for the Cosmos. What Judaism brought about, and now I'm going to make some very large generalizations, because Judaism is huge. The history of Judaism is huge. The history of Judaism, Christianity, Islam is gigantic. Right? And so just to pull out a few threads and collapse it into something really small, in a way, it's not right and it's not fair, but it's just an entry point. So what I want to say is that what Judaism has contributed, or is seen as contributing, is this overarching concept of God and what God means. This is the great theme that dominates the course of the Jewish religion, and that is that there is a single righteous God who is at work in the social and natural order. And that wasn't the case in the tribal system and the desert out of which Judaism grew. As we know, there were hundreds of gods. There were local gods. There was a god of every spring, or a goddess of every, well, oasis, local gods, all local gods. This concept of a single god evolved and became, interestingly, socially shared, collective consciousness over time. And this is the part that really interests me in particular. This all came about through a process of revelation. One revelation after another after another. Revelation to various prophets and individuals and whoever it came to. Somebody's getting a revelation. We're going to return to that. Somebody's getting a revelation coming from God. Or it could be God by any number of names. So, returning to that in a moment. So the origin of the biblical Hebrews is they were they came from tribes of the Syro-Arabian desert, nomads, wandering for centuries. I don't really like that word wandering. That's used a lot, wandering. But I think of, people here who were tribal, and what they did is they were following harvests and things like that, and very intentional. It wasn't just like wandering. I don't believe it was just wandering. It was very intentional, probably seasonal movement. In 2000 BC, first I have to say those tribes were led by a patriarch. So there was somebody in charge of those tribes, a chieftain, a patriarch, right? Okay, so in 2000 BC, in early times, the early Hebrews, so to speak, or in these tribes, the people venerated, especially, and you can see why, sacred springs and groves, because those are life-giving forces, right? And they're looking for those sacred groves and oases across the desert. They also venerated pillars and stones. That was major, and you read about this a lot in the Bible, about a sacred pillar, a sacred stone. And that's because usually those pillars or stones, or piles of stones, were landmarks where, if they were visually enhancing enough or something like that, it would become a landmark where you could gather and where something would happen. And maybe you could have some kind of spiritual teachings or something like that around the sacred pillar or the sacred stone. So they were gathering places. They also at the time existed spirits in human shapes. And these would be spirits on another plane, another level, that would take on human characteristics, and you might be talking to somebody, one of these spirits, or one of these spirits might be talking to you. They could be good spirits, they could be bad spirits. They had bad spirits too, right? There were bad spirits. So good spirits, bad spirits. So this was something that people felt and that they contended with. I sort of want to say not unlike today, but anyway, these energies. But they wrote about these energies and talked about these energies and experienced these energies. So these energies, these divinities, sometimes they were thought of as superhuman beings who could help, or divinities in some ways, or deities. And these divinities in Hebrew are called the Elohim, which you've heard that word. Okay, Eloah is singular, E-L-O-A-H, and Elohim, E-L-O-H-I-M, is plural. The Elohim, and in these early days, and we're still talking about 2000 BC, there were Elohim everywhere. All of these beings, all of these entities, deities, guardians of sacred springs, and so on like that, everywhere. The Elohim. What eventually is going to happen is this movement to the idea of the one who is all, the one true God. By many names, all the Elohim, whatever, all the deities come together into one being, and this one being is going to be the overarching God and the totality of the divine. The relationship, for these desert people, the relationship of the tribe or the tribelet group to this overarching God would come to be comparable to the relationship of people to kings, or to landlords, or to patriarchs. So the patriarch would have subjects' independence, like the king has the subjects' independence, or so on. And that's the kind of relationship that would emerge, that was going to emerge between the people and the God. They adopted the attitude, not being frightened, not of being frightened, wondering beings, approaching this impersonal and mysterious power, like an impersonal and mysterious power of nature, which was happening a lot in the vicinity, but rather they became like the people in a tribe, in a relationship to a chieftain, and they became more like, it was more intimate, and they became more like they were the children of this deity, the one God. So they would be approaching the one God more in that kind of a parental relationship. Now, what I want to do is cut to Abraham to talk about how this came about. So Abraham means, the word Abraham means Abram the Hebrew. So this is from Genesis 14:13. Abraham the Hebrew. So this is about 2000 BC. So Abraham was living near Ur, which is in Mesopotamia. That's where Inanna was, in Ur. I'm just going to put that out there. 3000 BC. You are. You are.
That's right. Okay.
Right.
Just
that's where Inanna was in 3000 BC. The ziggurat to Inanna. But now we're 2000 BC, and this is where Abraham lived. And so he was living near Ur, and in Ur, it's said, at a certain time in Mesopotamia. At that time in 2000 BC, the Middle East was in a state of horrendous flux, a lot of tension, constant peril of being invaded from every side. Okay, that was 4,000 years ago. Abraham, searching for an answer and opening himself up to essentially receive a revelation, was guided and encouraged by El Shaddai, who was a deity, El Shaddai, who eventually was going to be recognized as being the one true God. Okay, so El Shaddai. Abraham was encouraged by El Shaddai to migrate to a safer place where there was more favorable grazing for the animals. El Shaddai guided him. Abraham heard the voice, And Abraham, in turn, gave his allegiance to this one being. He bound himself to follow El Shaddai. And El Shaddai informed him that he should do kindness and practice justice and righteousness. So that's really important. So he could go ahead and he could migrate. And during that time, be kind, be just, and be righteous. So El Shaddai demanded then that he adhere to this covenant by sacrificing his son Isaac. Okay, and Abraham, actually being kind and just and righteous, didn't want to sacrifice his son Isaac, and so he sacrificed a ram instead. And it turns out, El Shaddai accepted that, and that was okay with El Shaddai. And El Shaddai promised Abraham and his descendants a permanent home in the land of Canaan. So what happened now is they begin to travel from Ur to Canaan, and then they arrive and they make their home on a limestone ridge. When Abraham died, and this limestone ridge is like right on the edge of the continent. So when Abraham died, his son Isaac and his grandson Jacob took his place. And they were fine for a long time. Okay? Are you guys following this story? Does it make sense to you, those of you who have really studied this stuff? Okay, good. Okay, good. One question?
Yes, I was in the part about Abraham and Isaac. There has been some discussion that particular event put an end to child sacrifice, that up until that time child sacrifice was acceptable, and after that time, no.
There you go. Look, Abraham, it only takes one man to change the course of history. So there's Abraham putting an end to human sacrifice and making a switch and putting it into animal sacrifice. Please add, anybody, because I'm really generalizing, right? Okay, so now what happens is they're living on this cliff, right? This limestone cliff, and then what happens is there's a terrible famine. They were okay for 150 years on the cliff, okay, and then terrible famine, and they had to leave. So again, they're sent out. So the descendants of Abraham have to migrate again, and this time they go to Egypt. For generations in Egypt, everything was fine. It was all good. The Israelites prospered and they multiplied, and then what happened was the Egyptian people had a revolution against those who were repressing them. And this, now we're up to 1580 BC. So between 1580 and 1560, so this 20-year process, there was this revolution going on. So the Egyptians rose up and expelled the Hyksos, the ruling caste. And after they were able to expel the ruling caste in Egypt for 150 years, everything was fine. Okay, so this is good. Then Ramses II came along. So Ramses II, he built all these, you've probably seen pictures of all of these monuments and temples and things he built. So they called him a mad pharaoh. So he came into power. He lived from 1304 to 1237. So now we're moving through history really quickly here. So his passion was to build these monumental temples, and what he needed to do that was slave labor. Slave labor. Okay, so what does he do? He drafts the Israelites, who basically had been living peacefully all this time, as slaves. So now here's the new slave population. So here are the Israelites, and they need to be rescued. Okay, so how are they going to get out of this? So now we're 1250 BC, roughly, and Moses arises. So Moses is called to deal with this situation. He feels compelled. I have to do something about this situation. And, here's what I'm going to do. I need to, first, I'm extemporaneous. Never mind. But I have this feeling of Moses thinking, think it through, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? So in the midst of Ramses' domination, Moses arises in the midst of the Israelites, basically, and what he did was he revolutionized the religious orientation of the Hebrews by basically persuading them to adopt the basic idea of what will become this Israelite religion. Okay, and here's what it was. There is but one God, supreme over their history. So I'm going to put myself inside of being an Israelite. There is one God, supreme over our history and supreme over our lives. This God, our God, chose us, Israel. Israel is the people. Chose us, Israel, to be his people. And he desires to make a covenant with us, that we will be his people. We choose him and he chooses us. We want this God to be active in our history, and he wants to be active in our history. And he is saying he will bless or punish us according to our faithfulness. So I want to choose to be faithful to this God because I want to be blessed by this God. And what ends up happening is that all of nature and all other deities now come under one God. This is the one God of many with many potential names, but behind it all, there's only one God, and we are going to follow this God. So this is what Moses did. See, he had the revelation, this is what's going to bind the people, and it's the only thing that is going to get them out from under slavery, is if they can come together with an idea strong enough to propel them, to compel them, to move them, to impel them. Okay, so the name of the new God is Yahweh. Yahweh. Translation of Yahweh. I am that I am. And it comes from the 4 Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vah, He. And it's very interesting how, with what we're working with, the fire, the water, the air, and the earth are associated. Those elements all come under the one, Yod, He, Vah, He. Whirling together and spinning together as one. So God came to the people through Moses and then made a covenant with the people who needed God. The people needed God, and God needed the people. And then a covenant was struck. So now, with the people united will never be defeated. Okay? So there starts a mass exodus. And the mass exodus is going to cross the Red Sea. And so you know this story. They come to the Red Sea with all the people, and Moses parts the waters. The people move through the waters, and then here are coming the Egyptians in hot pursuit in their chariots, right? And they come to the edge, and just as they get to the edge and they're getting ready to apprehend the people, the waters close right behind the people. Right behind the people, right in front of the army, right? So there's no way for them to get across. So now the people are safe. So then they go across the Red Sea, and at the other side of the Red Sea, Moses begins to receive commandments. And these commandments are inscribed on 2 stone tablets, which become the Torah, the law, and that's God's teachings. Okay, then what happens? Okay, now we're going to just skip way to somewhere else. Okay, I wanted to skip to Isaiah, which is, okay, going forward here. 742 BC, Isaiah. Why do I want to talk about Isaiah? Because I think this becomes a critical part of the movement. Isaiah, in a revelation, receives a vision of a new age. So here's what happens. A time is coming, a new age that will dawn after the day of wrath and doom is past. This will be a time of a warless world under the benign rule of a Prince of Peace. Where's the music? Na, 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 na. Okay, so this is the Messiah. This is the Messiah. And the Messiah will spring from the lineage of David, who sprang from the lineage of Abraham. And this Prince of Peace, this Messiah, will bring a new day. This Messiah, under this Messiah, swords will be turned into plowshares. Spears will be turned into pruning hooks. And men will no longer fight. Well, later generations continued to linger over this prophecy, continue to linger and continue to linger. This new age coming. It also came to pass that in a little while, the Israelites themselves discovered that they could speak directly with God. They did not need a mediator. God became a personal advisor. And anybody who called out, like, hey, why are you doing this to me? Or whatever, could have a conversation in a certain sense with a personal God. God became a personal advisor. And yet there were certain individuals all along the way who would be advised by God, but they would be receiving larger revelations that would actually impact the whole history of the nation. I'm just calling it the nation right now. And these revelations were intended to guide the people. Okay, so that would be happening all along. Okay, what about this idea of revelation? This is what I wanted to cut to. I love this idea of revelation. The Jews of the ancient world developed a profound grasp of meaning that changed the way that the people of the time, and of course that was over a long period of time, we're talking 1,500 years, up to 2,000 years. What happened in this change was they developed a relationship with a personal, engaged God, a God who was interested in their affairs and also in their history. God who could help them, a God who could be on their side. How did this come about? All of it, including this personal connection, developed as a result of revelation. One revelation after another revelation. Opening up to receive. Insights were revealed to them. What is a revelation? It is a disclosure. It's like a disclosure directly from God. Revelation means a lifting or a rending or a parting of the veil. It reveals. A revelation reveals that which has been concealed, as they say. And then there were specific sorts of revelations. Revelations of God's nature and revelations of God's will for humankind. God wants something from us. God wants us to do something. Okay, what do you want me to do? I'm listening. See, this is the idea. What do you want me to do? I'm paying attention. So God begins to reveal himself. And mainly, he reveals himself, and I'm saying himself because that's the language that was being used. Because again, it was like the child with the father, and the patriarchs had been the heads of the tribes, right? So God reveals himself through his actions, through his deeds. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. What God did was he liberated an unorganized, enslaved people from the mightiest power of the age. God brought the people out of Egypt. In action, through action, Yahweh's character is made known. the people said, by the grace of God, Israel is saved. By the grace of God, Israel is saved. Divine intervention. Divine intervention began to permeate everyday life in every way, on every level. Abraham left Ur for Canaan because Yahweh called him to father a people of destiny. These are people of destiny. You're going to lead them. You need to go from Ur to Canaan. God led, protected, and shaped the people through some individuals who heard those revelations. The Jews perceived God's nature, but more importantly, God showed them or demonstrated to them his nature. God took the initiative. The people could open to receive, but it was God who took the initiative. So what is the nature of God? So how was the nature of God revealed, and what was it? God was powerful. This is how the God was seen. Powerful, good, loving, and intensely concerned with human affairs. This God was not just a God of nature, but a God of historical movements. Because earlier in the past, we had more a feeling in primal religions of God being, let's say, being associated with the ocean or a forest or something like that, not necessarily involved in human affairs. But this God was intensely involved in human affairs and human history. Okay, human history. So, and the attitude of the Jews was that they were grateful, extremely grateful. And in fact, they felt that they received unmerited grace. Because what had they done to evoke such love from the God who was so concerned and interested in their affairs? So they were very grateful. Thank you. Thank you for being concerned about me. And, we really appreciate it, and we are deeply grateful for ourselves and for all humanity. And then God revealed by the 8th century BC, I not only love you guys, but I love everybody. Are you not just like the Ethiopians? And I love the Ethiopians even as I love you. So it's the whole feeling of it started to spread. It started to get really wide. When I'm saying what I'm talking about is God. Wide spread. Then a lot of effort began to go into discerning Yahweh's will and trying to enact it. And what did God want? So as God revealed to the people, what did God want? Okay, God wanted the people to be good. And that was demonstrated by the 10 commandments that were given to show the people how to be good. God wanted the people to be just, and demonstrate virtue in the social sphere and also in their institutional structures, like trade, ethical trade, and things like that. So goodness, justness, and then the third aspect was, because God is good and because God is just, if we're suffering, there must be a reason for it. Because God wouldn't do that unless there was something we were supposed to learn or get out of this. So suffering must carry some kind of significance, because it is unthinkable that God, who has saved us, would abandon us. It's unthinkable. Okay, so why do I have to go through this? Job. Why do I have to go through this, right? So, okay, all of this leads up to the idea of a covenant between the people and God. So what is a covenant? A covenant is beyond a contract. A contract is limited in time and space usually, and we sign it, it's good for this amount of time or whatever. A covenant is more involved than a contract. A covenant is more like a vow. It involves pledging your whole self and everything that you are to whatever is happening, and there is no termination date. So when you pledge yourself, you pledge yourself. Like when Abraham pledged himself to El Shaddai, when Muhammad pledged himself to Allah, this is a covenant. I will follow you. When Jesus pledged himself to God, I will follow you no matter what happens. That's when the pledge becomes so strong, it overshadows everything else, and it doesn't matter what happens after that. Once you've made your pledge, you lose your life. It's part of the covenant. So the Israelites would continue to be blessed if they upheld their end of the covenant and if they did what God wanted. And part of them being so strong in the covenant was believing that they had been chosen in the first place, that God chose them to lift them out of Egypt. And I don't want to go into all the discussion about what it means to be chosen and what it means not to be chosen. But the covenant was definitely in place, and God revealed over time this holy word through the scriptures. You know, how it would come through, they would be written down eventually, not yet. Usually it would take maybe 400 years or something before things were being written down. But they would come through, and then they're being passed down word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth. Now, a note about the Kabbalah. So I'm just skipping forward. Okay, the Kabbalah. Okay, what is the Kabbalah? Eventually, the Kabbalah emerged. And this is after the Bible. This was after everything was, this is after the Torah, after the commandments, you know, and all had been brought together, and then later, and now we're leaping all the way up to maybe another 1,000 years. So now we're in like 1,000, AD. Okay, so what's happening now is the Kabbalah emerges to go deeper into God's word, to understand more fully what God wants through speculative mysticism. And people are asking, what are the deeper meanings? We've got to know more than just what is written here. We have to go deeper in it. And so what was developed, or what came forth, what God gave to the people. Because God, in the end, is the one who is the one in charge, right? So God gives a series of mystical numbers and letters, and showing to the people series which show sequencing for the emanation of the whole universe and aspects of the universe and human life. So this becomes elucidated in for the Hebrews, in the book of in Zohar, the book of enlightenment, which this came forth in about the 1280s from Spain, from Moses de Leon in Spain, and then the Sefer Yetzirah. Unknown date on the Sefer Yetzirah, unknown author, but this is the one that talks about how all the worlds begin to emerge, how the worlds of fire, water, air, and earth coming together, holding these energies, and then with the 1 through 10. And I'll say also that with the 1 through 10, it was the Egyptians who came forward with that 1 base 10 number system. And so it was during that Egyptian, you could call it exile, I guess, or that period where all that information about the 1 through 10 number system was learned. And then it was in Greece where they had the 4 elements. And bringing those things together actually created the basis, if you can follow this, and if I'm not just making this up entirely, for scientific inquiry. Because once you had this number system, you could start doing math, and working with a very elaborate mathematical system. And they already began to recognize that in the 5th century BC, when this information was already coming from Egypt to Greece, and they're starting to work with mathematical models and things like that, and really taking a very strong look at this universe and how it fits together. So I'm just making a little leap there, but I think a lot of the Kabbalistic information, which does look at numbers and letters would be for recording and expressing, creates a way not only for some scientific results to begin to come about that can corroborate some of the spiritual information, but also a really strong, profound way to communicate information as the quote, the letters arise. Okay, so this is Kabbalah. Kabbalah opens up another level of divination, which is through Kabbalah, one can have a different level, maybe a deeper level, that's what people were hoping, of a conversation with God. The basic elements of the Kabbalah are contained in the Tree of Life, the Tree of Life diagram. And there have been many renditions of the Tree of Life that have come down. So this started the trying to diagram, trying to put this in some kind of form or some kind of diagram, started, I can't give you an exact date, but it would definitely be BC, right, by BC. But by 1000 AD, there had been many renditions of this recorded, just all kinds of trees of life emerging, trying to depict and show. And then by the 1400s, we had basically the diagram that we're working with right now of the Tree of Life. So it had evolved, but it had also been persecuted. Okay, because it was seen, there's a rendition. So this is out of the book, The Tree of Life, Roger Cook. So all kinds of pictures of how it evolved. But then as it evolved, it became more and more explicit. When these, okay, this Kabbalistic way of knowing had been pushed way underground with the rise of the Christian church. It was seen as blasphemous, and it was seen as heretical, and it was seen as dangerous. So by the peak of the Inquisition, it was way underground. And in the peak of the Inquisition, so we're talking 1400 to 1500 AD-ish, but it was exactly in the peak of the Inquisition that the Kabbalah surfaced and became seen. And when it surfaced and became seen, because it was going to be used to help overturn another repressive government, essentially, and that would be the monarchy. Okay, so we're going to come to the voice of God in a different way now, through divination, through the Kabbalah, and through this information, and we're going to see about overturning the monarchy. So people are saying, okay, look at this, what we've got over here, and this is going to help us because we have been taught by God the sequence of the unfolding of the universe. We can actually step inside that sequence and we can unfold it. See, we can make this happen. Okay, so this is all going on. And at the time of the surfacing, so let's say 1475, the diagram of the Kabbalah surfaces, well, it's being held by several groups, not just one. So it's being held by the esoterically oriented Hebrew community, where it's been underground. It's being held by Gnostic Christians. It's being held by the Masons. It's being held by the Rosicrucians. They all have the same model. So this got shared and pushed underground, and when it surfaced, they all had the same model. Maybe they had slightly different meanings here and there, because we can't forget it had been passed down from mouth to ear, as they call it, for several generations. So when it surfaced, it may have been slightly different in meaning, but the exact same pattern with the 4 elements and the 10 numbers. And this is essentially the Tree of Life that we're using today, the living Tree of Life. Okay, and because it's gone through so many changes and it went through so many changes, that's why they call it the living Tree of Life, because each change that was brought about with the Kabbalah is a body of knowledge, and the Tree of Life is a diagram that represents it, essentially. Every change in that Tree of Life, or the Kabbalistic knowledge it represents, represents came about by a revelation of somebody. So each time somebody has a revelation and it gets recorded into this material, the material changes. So they call it the living Kabbalah, or the living tree of life. It's alive. It's just as alive as the people having the revelations. But the whole process of the revelation goes all the way back. It's what is the word for it? It's systemic. It's throughout. It permeates the whole idea, going all the way back to Abraham and maybe before, of the whole Jewish, Christian, Islamic tradition, all sharing the one overarching God, connecting with the people, and then through revelation after revelation after revelation, blossoming and unfolding. And we never know who's going to get a revelation, when or where, who God is going to choose to speak directly to. So as I was thinking about this and moving more deeply into it, and a little bit more deeply into understanding the history of Judaism, I just got this little light go on in my own consciousness. Oh my gosh, I have really been influenced by this without realizing it. Since what am I doing but sitting around and talking to the guides myself, and opening up to receive the information and energy and asking for guidance? Well, I am exactly in the flow of my predecessors for 4,000 years here or more. And so I was just really tuning into that. So the Tree of Life, in the end, what the Tree of Life depicts with the 10 numbers, these 10 numbers are called 10 books of the law, the Sephiroth they're called. Each of those 10 numbers contains various names of God, it's called, or the Elohim. Those words are still used, or the angels of God. That's like all the different aspects, but in the end, the Tree of Life is one. So the Tree of Life represents the one in the many and the many in the one, with its 4 elements, its 10 numbers, and it's got 22 Hebrew letters associated with it. And these letters are archetypes by which we learn and know and realize how to communicate. So this Tree of Life, what it allows for us is it allows our own mystical understanding to deepen. It's a way of communicating with the divine, and a way of knowing in ever deeper ways how to participate with the unfolding of the universe. Participate with the unfolding in ever more efficacious ways where we are in direct communication.